My name is Logan Pierce, and I have lived in this house on Desert Willow Lane in Phoenix, Arizona for 3 years now. I want you to understand that before last Tuesday, I considered myself a completely ordinary man with a completely ordinary life. I worked as an accountant for a mid-sized firm downtown, drove a Honda Accord with a small dent in the rear bumper from a parking lot mishap I kept meaning to fix, and I had a modest routine that rarely deviated from the expected patterns of sleep, work, meals, and the occasional drink on the patio when the desert heat finally relented in the evening hours. The house itself was nothing special, just a single-story ranch-style place with terracotta roof tiles and a small backyard where I sometimes thought about planting something, but never did. And I had chosen it precisely because it was unremarkable, because it asked nothing of me and offered nothing beyond shelter from the brutal Arizona sun that blazed through 9 months of the year. I had no wife, no children, no pets beyond a fish named Walter, who seemed content to swim in circles indefinitely. And I had made peace with this solitude the way men in their mid-40s often do, telling themselves that loneliness is really just freedom dressed in uncomfortable clothes. The letter arrived at 6:47 p.m., according to the timestamp on my security camera, though I did not discover it until nearly an hour later when I finally checked the mailbox on my way inside from the garage. The envelope was cream-colored and old-fashioned, the kind your grandparents might have used when correspondence still mattered, and my name was typed rather than printed, each letter slightly misaligned, as if struck by an antique typewriter that had seen better decades. There was no return address, no postmark, no indication of how it had arrived in my mailbox without being sorted through the postal system. And when I opened it, my keys still in one hand, my messenger bag still over my shoulder, I found a single sheet of paper bearing 3 sentences in that same mechanical script that made my stomach clench with sudden, inexplicable dread. Someone will be murdered in your home tonight. The victim is you. Do not sleep. I remember standing there in my doorway, the evening air still warm against my skin, the neighborhood quiet except for the distant hum of air conditioners struggling against the heat. And I laughed, a short, nervous sound that echoed too loudly in the empty house. A prank, obviously. Someone with too much time on their hands and access to an old office machine, I decided. Some neighbor's teenage kid playing a cruel joke on the quiet guy who kept to himself and never seemed to have visitors. I tossed the letter on the kitchen counter and poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, the amber liquid catching the overhead light, and I stood there drinking slowly while the sun finally surrendered to the horizon and the house filled with the blue-gray shadows of evening. But something kept drawing my eyes back to that letter, kept making me pick it up and read it again. And each time I read those 3 sentences, the words seemed heavier, denser, as if they carried physical weight that pressed against my chest and made breathing difficult. I examined the envelope more closely, searching for any clue, a fingerprint, a hair, anything that might reveal the identity of whoever had put this through my mail slot. And I noticed that the paper itself smelled faintly of lavender, an odd detail that seemed wrong somehow, out of place, like finding flowers growing in a graveyard. I checked every window, every door, my hands growing increasingly unsteady as I tested locks that had always been sufficient before, and I stood in my living room as night settled, completely over the desert, listening to the house breathe around me in the darkness, wondering if I was losing my mind or if something genuinely terrible was beginning. By 10 o'clock, I had convinced myself that the letter was nothing, a sick joke, a random act of cruelty from some stranger who derived pleasure from frightening people. The kind of thing that made the news occasionally, when some disturbed individual sent warning letters to entire neighborhoods. I turned off most of the lights, leaving only the kitchen lamp burning, as it always did, a small beacon of normalcy in the gathering darkness. And I settled onto my worn leather couch with a paperback thriller I had no intention of actually reading. The kind of generic airport novel with a forgettable plot about government conspiracies and car chases that required nothing from the reader except turning pages. The house creaked the way it always did in the late hours. Old bones settling into old foundations, pipes contracting in the walls, the thousand small sounds of a structure that had weathered decades of desert sun and monsoon storms. And I let those familiar noises wash over me like white noise, trying to convince myself that there was nothing to fear, that I was safe behind my locked doors and drawn curtains. I poured a second bourbon, and then a third, and somewhere around 11, I started actually reading the book, losing myself in the predictable machinations of fictional characters whose problems would be solved by the final chapter in tidy, satisfying ways. And for a little while, I almost managed to forget the letter. Almost managed to believe that tomorrow would come and find me still alive in this house, still ordinary, still untouched by whatever madness had briefly seized my imagination. Then the phone rang, and my heart seized in my chest so violently that I dropped the book and nearly knocked over my drink, the ice cubes clinking against the glass as my hand shot toward the receiver with fingers that had gone suddenly cold. I said hello, and the pause that followed seemed to last forever, stretched out across time like taffy being pulled apart. And when the voice finally came, it was barely a whisper, a breathy thing that sounded like wind through dead leaves or static on a dying frequency, and it said only 4 words before the line went dead. The attic is open. I hung up and stared at the phone as if it might spontaneously combust, my pulse hammering in my temples, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps that I could not seem to control, and I pressed redial immediately, only to be informed by a flat, automated voice that the number I had dialed was not in service. My book lay open on the carpet where it had fallen, pages bent and spine cracked, and I did not pick it up. Instead, I sat frozen on the couch, counting the seconds between each creak of the house, each settling groan of wood, each distant sound from the street outside, where a car occasionally passed with headlights that swept briefly across my ceiling, like the beam of a lighthouse searching for ships that would never come. The house felt different now, charged with a presence I could not see, but could absolutely feel, a thickness in the air that made my skin prickle with goose flesh, and my eyes dart toward every shadow, every corner, every possible place where something might be watching me with patient, hungry attention. I thought about calling the police, about explaining that I had received a threatening letter and a disturbing phone call, but somehow I knew that would not help. Knew that whatever was happening had moved beyond the reach of ordinary authorities, had entered a realm where the rules were different and the outcomes were already decided. The second letter came at 2:17 a.m., slid under the front door while I sat frozen on the couch, my 4th bourbon untouched and warming on the coffee table beside the dead phone. My eyes fixed on the darkness of the hallway that led to my bedroom, and the bathroom, and the small closet where I kept things I never used. I watched it happen. I was watching. I had been watching for hours, unable to move, unable to think, unable to do anything except exist in that terrible space between waking and sleeping, where nightmares feel more real than the waking world. and I saw a pale rectangle glide slowly across the hardwood floor, pushed by an invisible hand that left no impression on the surface, that made no sound except the soft whisper of paper against wood. The letter stopped approximately 6 feet from where I sat, as if it had traveled exactly the right distance to be found, but not quite reached, and I did not move to pick it up for nearly 15 minutes, watching it the way a rabbit watches a hawk circling overhead, paralyzed by awareness of danger, but unable to flee. When I finally gathered enough courage to retrieve it, my legs aching from being held in the same position for so long, my fingers left damp prints on the paper that would not dry, and I found only 3 words typed in that same antique mechanical fashion. 3 hours remaining. The room seemed to grow colder around me, though the thermostat read the same temperature it had all evening, and I realized with a sickening clarity that the first letter had told me the night would end in murder, that the phone call had told me something was in the house, and that this third message was counting down the moments until the violence began. I called the police then, my voice steady only through sheer force of will, and explained the situation to a dispatcher who sounded bored, uninterested. The scratch of her pen the only acknowledgement that I was speaking at all. She asked for my address, my name, a description of the letters, whether I had any enemies or had recently ended any relationships, and I answered every question as honestly as I could, while my eyes continued their constant surveillance of the house, the windows, the shadows that seemed to breathe with a life of their own. An officer would come by, she said. It might take an hour or more, given the volume of calls on a Tuesday night in this part of the city. I hung up and walked to the kitchen, my footsteps echoing too loudly in the silence, and poured another drink with hands that would not stop shaking, no matter how hard I tried to steady them. The whiskey sloshing against the glass and spilling onto the counter in small amber rivulets that I did not bother to wipe up. And that was when I noticed the back door, the one I always kept locked, the one that led to the small concrete patio where I never sit because the afternoon sun makes it unbearable. The one that I had checked and double-checked and triple-checked before the sun went down, was standing slightly ajar, a sliver of moonlit yard visible through the gap, the night air creeping into the house with a slow, patient determination that made my stomach turn and my skin prickle with goose flesh. The cold that came with that air was not natural, not the pleasant coolness of a desert night after a brutal day, but something deeper and older, something that seemed to seep into my bones and settle there like ice water. And I understood in that moment that the door had not been opened by the wind, that nothing natural had pushed it open at all. I did not approach the door. Instead, I retreated to the bathroom and locked myself inside, sitting on the closed toilet lid with my knees drawn up to my chest, my back pressed against the cool porcelain tank, the 2 letters clutched in my hands like talismans that might protect me from whatever waited beyond the locked wood and brass deadbolt. The bathroom was small, barely 6 by 8 feet, with beige tile and a single light fixture that buzzed and flickered in irregular patterns that I had never noticed before, but now found hypnotic. The way the light stuttered and danced across the walls, seeming to create shapes that were not there, faces that dissolved when I tried to focus on them, fingers that reached toward me from the shadows between flickers. The fluorescent light above me buzzed and flickered, and in its stuttering glow, I noticed something I had missed before, something that had not been visible in the darkness of my earlier visit to this room. Tiny letters written in pencil on the mirror above the sink, nearly invisible, so faint that they might have been mistaken for dust, or water spots if you were not looking carefully. If you were not looking for messages from whatever cruel intelligence was orchestrating this night of mounting terror. The letters read, "Check the attic." 3 words that seemed to glow faintly in the bad light, that seemed to pulse with urgency, that I could feel resonating somewhere behind my eyes, in the space where logic and reason usually lived, but where tonight there was only fear and a terrible growing certainty that I was being guided towards something I did not want to find. I had not been in the attic since I moved into this house 3 years ago, too lazy to unpack the boxes I had brought from my previous life, too indifferent to create a proper storage system for the detritus of an existence lived mostly alone. The access hatch was in the hallway ceiling, the pull-down ladder folded into the dark space above, its presence marked only by a small rectangular outline in the popcorn ceiling texture that I had looked at 1,000 times without ever really seeing. I did not want to go up there. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to stay where I was, to wait for the police, to keep the locked door between me and whatever waited in the rest of the house. But the letters on the mirror seemed to pulse with increasing intensity, and I found myself standing before I had consciously decided to move. Found myself walking down the hall with the letters crackling in my clenched fists. Found myself standing beneath the hatch with my hand reaching up toward the pull cord, my heart hammering so violently against my ribs that I could feel my pulse in my teeth and my fingertips. A sound came from above me when I touched the cord, soft, rhythmic, like breathing, like something sleeping or waiting or both at once, and the temperature in the hallway dropped so suddenly that I could see my breath misting in the air before me. Small clouds of condensation that dissipated almost as soon as they formed, and I understood then that the letter had not warned me about a murder that would happen to me. I understood that it had been telling me about a murder that had already happened, was happening, would always be happening. A murder that was not an event, but a cycle, a pattern, a thing that fed on people like me and had been feeding on people like me for longer than I could comprehend. I pulled the ladder down with hands that shook so badly I nearly dropped it twice, the metal rungs clattering against the ceiling frame with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the silence of the house. And I climbed into the darkness with my phone held before me like a candle in a hurricane, its pale light revealing insulation and dust and the ancient shapes of boxes I had never bothered to open or even label. The attic smelled of forgotten things, of neglect and time, and something else beneath those expected scents, something sweet and thick that coated the back of my throat and made me want to gag. Something that reminded me of flowers left too long in a vase, of decay dressed in perfume to hide its true nature. The breathing sound grew louder as I moved deeper into the space, past boxes of old tax returns and forgotten holiday decorations, past furniture I no longer remembered owning, past a dresser mirror that reflected my face back at me with sickly accuracy. And I realized with a sickening lurch that the sound was not coming from the attic space itself, but from one of the trunks at the far end. Specifically that one, old leather with brass clasps, tarnished green with age, the kind my grandmother had owned, the kind that belonged to another era when people kept different things in their attics and when some things were meant to stay buried. I should not have had this trunk. I had never seen it before, had never brought it into this house, had no memory of purchasing it at any estate sale or antique shop, and when I knelt before it and fumbled with the clasp, my fingers slipping on cold metal that seemed to resist my touch, I understood with dawning horror that I had not received a warning at all. I had received an invitation. The lid opened slowly, releasing that smell of roses and something darker, something chemical and wrong. And inside, on a bed of yellowed lace, lay a photograph of a man who looked exactly like me. The same face, the same tired eyes, the same expression of dawning horror that must have been frozen on my own features in that moment. Except the photograph was dated 1962, 34 years before I was born. The sepia tones and paper texture confirming its age beyond any doubt. A second photograph slipped from between the pages of a leather-bound Bible I had not noticed until that moment, falling into my lap with the soft sound of paper meeting fabric. And this one showed the same man, but older, gaunt, his throat marked with dark bruises that told their own story, his eyes staring up at nothing with the vacant focus of the recently dead. Behind me, the breathing had stopped. The attic had gone absolutely silent in a way that seemed wrong, unnatural, a silence that pressed against my eardrums like deep water pressure. And when I turned around, my phone's light revealing the hatch entrance 10 feet below me, I saw that something was descending the ladder. Something with hands that moved like a human being's hands, but with a slowness, a deliberation, a patience that suggested it had all the time in the world to complete this journey. That time itself meant nothing to this creature. Its face was not a face, just smooth skin stretched over nothing. An absence given form that should not have been able to see, but that I knew, somehow, was looking directly at me with an attention that felt like insects crawling across my skin. The thing smiled. I think it smiled, though it had no mouth to smile with. And I understood that I would never leave this house, never see another sunrise over the desert mountains, never do anything again except become the next photograph in the collection, the next name in a file I would never find, the next body to be stored in a trunk that would wait in an attic for 30 years until its new owner moved in and began to feel the first stirrings of an ancient hunger. I screamed, and my scream became part of the house, absorbed into its walls and floorboards and foundations, joining the screams of all the others who had lived this life before me, who had received this same invitation, who had climbed into their attics seeking answers and found only endings. The police never came. The letters had told me the truth all along.